They said the house could be seen from the river, even when the fog covered everything else. An old plantation carved out of red clay and pine roots, leaning slightly, as though exhausted by memory. It was built before the war, before the land remembered its first screams. For 20 years, no woman's voice had echoed through its halls. Only one man's, Elijah Corbin, the last heir of a family that once traded flesh and faith in equal measure. In 1852, after years of isolation, Elijah returned from Montgomery with 7 women, bought at an auction few remembered and fewer spoke of. The neighbors whispered it was grief that drove him. Others said it was something else, something unholy that kept him company in the silence of that house. The house absorbed them all like soil swallowing rain. And from that day on, Hale County changed its weather. No one recorded the bill of sale. The auctioneer himself vanished a month later, his ledger found open to a blank page. But an old letter, and signed, tells of a man who stood apart from the crowd, watching the women with a look not of lust, but of longing. He chose 7, each one bearing marks of another life. One a teacher's daughter, one near blind, one with a burn shaped like a handprint across her back. Elijah Corbin didn't haggle. He simply said, "They are enough," and left. That phrase, "they are enough," became a sort of curse among the locals, because in the months after, 7 was never just a number. It was the rhythm of screams that came from the plantation at night, always in 7s, always ending in silence. Elijah opened the east wing again, the one sealed since his mother's death. The servants said the air there felt heavy, like it hadn't been breathed in years. He ordered 7 beds to be placed side by side, each facing a single wall of cracked mirrors. At first, the women slept close, whispering hymns in the dark. But after the 3rd night, one began to mutter in her sleep, "There's another among us." No one believed her until they counted one morning and found 8 shadows against the wall. Before his solitude, Elijah Corbin had been engaged to Mary. Her name was Mary Beth Hale, daughter of a preacher, delicate as spun glass. She died in childbirth before their wedding day. Her name was Lydia. She was the youngest, barely 17, sold after her mother's death. She alone dared to look Elijah in the eyes. The others followed, obeyed, survived. But Lydia watched. She noticed the way he trembled before certain doors, the way he spoke to empty chairs as if awaiting reply. Elijah called her the last. He claimed her spirit was untouched by the world, and for that reason, she would restore what he'd lost. By winter, Lydia no longer answered to her own name. Every dawn, Elijah forced them to bathe in cold water drawn from the well, the same well his mother had thrown herself into years before. He said it was to wash the world off their souls. But the water grew darker each week. The servants said it smelled like iron. When one of the women refused, Elijah made the others hold her down until her lungs filled. The next morning, the water in the well turned clear again. He called it proof that the Lord still watched over him. Hale County wasn't innocent. The town thrived on whispers, feeding off every strange occurrence. Children dared each other to walk the road that led to Corbin's estate. None reached the gate. They said the air there felt thick, as if the world itself held its breath. Then came the rumors of singing, 7 voices weaving through the pine trees at night. Some claimed it was morning. Others swore it was something closer to prayer. Whatever it was, it didn't sound human. The mirrors in the east wing began to warp. Not visibly, not at first. But those who looked long enough said their reflections began to move out of sync. Smiles came a second too late. Eyes lingered longer than they should. Elijah insisted the mirrors were sacred, that through them, God was revealing the truth of the soul. One morning, he smashed all but one. He kept the largest for himself, claiming it was the only one that still listened. From then on, he spoke to it daily, sometimes gently, sometimes screaming. By spring, only 6 women remained. The others were sent away, he said, though no one ever saw them leave. Elijah emerged one morning dressed in black, a white rose pinned to his chest. He announced he would marry Lydia, the youngest, in a private ceremony within the East Wing. There were no witnesses, no priest, no scripture, only a mirror, a man, and a trembling girl. When the door closed behind them, a neighbor swore they heard laughter, a sound not of joy, but of recognition. After the ceremony, the Corbin estate seemed to exhale. The servants said the air turned warm again, that the wood no longer creaked at night. but it was an illusion. The calm of a fever before it breaks. Lydia began walking barefoot through the halls, whispering to corners, tracing the wallpaper as if reading invisible scripture. Elijah followed her shadow like a man possessed, speaking to her as though she were two people. One day, she called him Father. The next, she called him Beloved. By the third, she spoke only to the mirror. Ruth was the eldest of the 7, the one who sang lullabies in secret when the nights grew unbearable. She was the first to go missing after the wedding. Elijah told the others that Ruth had ascended. He pointed to the mirror and said, "She's on the other side now, where obedience becomes light." The others dared not ask. But Lydia began to sleep beside the mirror, waiting for Ruth to return. Some nights, she woke screaming, saying Ruth's reflection smiled, but without eyes. By midsummer, the smell spread through the house, a sweetness like rotting fruit, seeping up from the east wing's floor. Elijah forbade anyone to lift the boards. Some things must remain buried in faith, he said. Yet one night, when he was away, one of the women pried a plank loose. What she saw wasn't flesh, nor bone, but strands of hair, woven into the earth like roots. Dozens of them, knotted together, moving slightly as if breathing. By dawn, the plank was nailed shut again. She told no one. But her hair began to fall out by the next week. In a forgotten room behind the staircase, Lydia found an old cradle, carved from oak, painted white. Inside lay a small bundle wrapped in linen. She lifted it and froze. The fabric was warm. There was nothing inside, yet something pulsed, faint and rhythmic, like a heartbeat heard through walls. Elijah found her holding it and smiled with relief, whispering, "You've finally found our son." He ordered the cradle placed beside their bed. That night, the women heard him humming lullabies through the walls. The next morning, Lydia's voice was gone. People stopped taking the road past Corbin's land. The postman refused to deliver there after finding his horse frozen in the middle of the path, eyes open, unblinking. Letters from the estate stopped too. The Reverend's last note to the sheriff said only, "If the Lord dwells there, he has forgotten his mercy." Children grew up hearing tales of the Corbin house, of the man who made his grief into worship, and the women who became his congregation. None of them knew those stories were not yet finished. Lydia wore a ring Elijah claimed had belonged to Mary Beth, his dead fiancée. It fit too perfectly. Sometimes it slipped from her finger at night and rolled across the floor, stopping only at the mirror's base. She swore she heard whispering from inside the glass when she touched it, a woman's voice saying, "Give it back." One night, she woke with blood around her finger. The ring was gone. Elijah said, "It's been accepted." He kissed her hand as if in gratitude, not noticing the faint burn mark now circling her skin like a brand. The surviving women began writing secret notes, scraps of linen inked with ash. One was found years later in the attic. "He prays to something that wears his face. He says it listens through us. When we close our eyes, it moves closer." The writer's name was Grace, the 6th woman. She vanished 2 nights after the note was written. The next morning, the mirror had a new crack, thin as a hairline, running from its center down to the floor. Elijah called it proof of unity. Elijah began hosting feasts for no one. Plates were set for 7, food untouched. He would sit at the head of the table, speaking to the empty chairs, asking if they were pleased, if they forgave him, if they were ready to return. Sometimes he laughed. Sometimes he wept. The servants stood outside the door listening, counting each question, always 7. When one dared to peek inside, all the plates were clean, though no one had eaten. The servant fled that night and was never seen again. Lydia, watching from the doorway, began to mimic his laughter. That autumn, the skies above Hale County turned black for 3 days straight. The thunder never stopped, a constant, low hum that vibrated through the fields. Neighbors said lightning struck the Corbin estate at least twice, yet the house never caught fire. Inside, Elijah knelt before the mirror, blood on his hands, chanting the names of the missing women. Lydia stood behind him, eyes glazed, whispering in unison. When the storm finally broke, every mirror in the house shattered, except one. After the storm, the fields around the estate bloomed out of season. White flowers where cotton should have been, their petals shaped like open eyes. Elijah called it a miracle. He claimed the Lord had spoken through the wind and told him that the others would return soon. That night, he saw them, 7 figures standing beyond the window, drenched, silent, unmoving. He opened the door, calling each by name. Only Lydia answered. By dawn, his footprints led into the woods and stopped at the river's edge. The next morning, Lydia was wearing his clothes. A week later, Elijah returned to the house, barefoot, clothes torn, eyes hollow. He said nothing for 3 days. He simply followed Lydia wherever she went, as though unsure who she was. The servants whispered that he had changed, that he didn't blink anymore, that his shadow moved half a second slower than his body. One evening, he stood before the mirror and whispered, "I saw myself, and I forgave him." After that, he began sleeping on the floor beside the cradle. The others pretended not to hear the soft crying that came from inside it. In the attic, a book appeared, thick, bound in cracked leather. It contained names, dates, and beside each name, a single word, given. There were 7 entries. The last space was blank. Lydia touched it once and felt her pulse slow, her breath shorten. When she looked up, Elijah was watching her, smiling. He said, "It's not written yet because you haven't decided who you are." That night, she began writing in her sleep, copying verses no one had ever taught her. Verses that spoke of redemption through reflection. For the first time, the remaining women refused to kneel. They locked the east wing and hid the mirror under sheets. Lydia joined them, her voice steady for the first time in months. But Elijah only laughed. He said faith cannot be locked away, that the mirror would call for whoever was purest among them. By morning, one woman was gone. The sheet was gone too. The mirror stood uncovered, showing not the room, but the inside of a field, white flowers swaying in wind that didn't exist. Lydia found a painting hidden behind the old organ, Elijah as a boy, standing beside his mother. But where her face should have been, the canvas had rotted through, leaving only darkness. Beneath it was written, "She loved what he would become." Lydia burned the portrait. The smoke filled the house with a sweetness like crushed lilies. Elijah entered the room and stared at the ashes. "Now she's in you," he said. That's what she wanted. That night, Lydia dreamed of hands cradling her face, too many hands to count. The river behind the estate began to rise, though there had been no rain. It crept toward the house inch by inch, swallowing the garden, the fences, the graves. Lydia watched from the porch as it reached the white cross marking Mary Beth's resting place. When the water touched it, the cross fell. Something surfaced beneath it, a ring of bone, carved with 7 names. Lydia took it and placed it on her finger. It fit perfectly, just as the other had. From that day on, her reflection always smiled first. The servants fled that month, leaving behind half-cooked meals and open doors. They said the house had begun breathing, that they heard whispers from the walls calling them by name. When they reached town, they told the sheriff the Corbin estate was cursed, that neither man nor woman should step foot there again. The sheriff rode out once. He didn't return. His horse did, carrying his hat and a Bible, soaked through with river water. Lydia prepared the table as Elijah had once done, 7 plates, 7 cups. She sat at the head and spoke softly, her voice low but commanding. The remaining women obeyed, trembling. She told them that freedom was an illusion, that salvation was to become what he had seen in them, obedient, unbroken, eternal. One by one, they drank from their cups. One by one, they grew still. At dawn, Lydia sat alone, surrounded by silence. The mirror reflected 7 empty chairs, and one figure still standing behind her. It was never a mirror. Not truly. Behind the glass was only a window, not to heaven or hell, but to memory. A trap for guilt. Elijah had built it with the help of his mother's journal, believing it could restore what grief had taken. But the reflection did not heal, it devoured. Every sin whispered to it became flesh. Every prayer turned to echo. And when Lydia looked one final time, she saw herself, older, crueler, wearing Elijah's eyes. The house had chosen its next keeper. Neighbors saw fire on the horizon that night, a glow without flame, a house that burned without smoke. The Corbin estate collapsed inward, as though folding into itself. By morning, only the well remained, filled to the brim with black water. No bodies, no ashes. When the sun rose, the water cleared. Beneath the surface, something gleamed, a single ring, spinning slowly, waiting for a hand. For decades, the land remained barren. Nothing grew where the house once stood. But on certain nights, when the fog rolled in from the river, travelers said they saw a figure, a woman in a white dress, walking along the bank, humming softly. In her hand, she carried a mirror cracked straight through the center. Some say it was Lydia. Others say it was what Elijah became through her. No one dares to speak their names aloud anymore. Because in Hale County, Alabama, silence is the only prayer left that God still answers.